Hello, I am Andrea Calabresi. You are now on Artist to Artist, our new format where I, as an artist, talk about the work of another artist. Those are artist impressions. This is not the opinion of a critic, nor those of an historian. Just fresh, straight opinion of an artist toward the work of another artist. I hope you enjoy our work and remember, we need your help. So please subscribe, comment, share. Today I would like to talk about Roger Fenton, and the first question is why such an old photography? Why historical photography? And here is the reason. Those early photographers, especially those early photographers who believed that photography was an art form, are very influential. So they planted seeds that we still see growing. So the influence of Roger Fenton, for example, is still very much alive today in the work of contemporary artists. So it is very good and very interesting to look at his work. His work might show the sign of time. So many of his images didn't age well, we could say. But at the same time, we can recognize the beginning of trends that developed from that work, or the ideas of that time and that we see today. Many of Roger Fenton images are not timeless at all, but some are. And I have a question about this. There is a reason why we see an image that maybe is almost 200 years old and we don't see the age in it. So we see the age maybe technically, but framing, composition, the message, we feel it as still contemporary. Is it because that thing hasn't changed in our society, or our vision on that subject hasn't changed, or there is something more related just to human experience, and so it is really timeless? Question mark. I don't have the answer for this, but it puzzles me. Roger Fenton was born in 1819 and died in 1869, quite young. He was one of many sons and daughters of a banker and the nephew of an important banker and manufacturer. So he was born in a very wealthy family and received the best education of the time. He was also trained as a painter within many things. So he went to France, he studied briefly with De La Roche, and he then followed other painters. Of those painters, I think from them he gained the passion for history and particularly representing history. So De La Roche or Lucy were painters that did many historical representation, especially of small history or like famous little happenings in the big picture of histories. Those images were popular at the time because they were closer to the human experience and not this big, faraway picture of the big battles, let's say. So he did an important work and was one of the first trying to document war. It was the time of the Crimean War. It was a strange war, it was a slow, low-intensity war. Most of them died of maladies rather than in battle, but still, it was something big, like war is a big thing. He did, at the time, an image that became iconic, a very important image, still today, an image that's strong, timeless, and Shadows of the Valley of Death. That image is extremely important because there are two versions of the same image. One with cannonballs, another one without. So the thing was this, was this a setup? So did he arrange the cannonballs in order to achieve a more powerful image? Or maybe they were removed or they were there afterwards, maybe dropped somehow there. So this is a question for historians. There are videos and there are people who spend almost their entire life to solve the mystery of whether which one was made before. I, as an art think that it has no importance at all, because the importance for us is the power of the representation. So these images with the cannonballs is evocative. We don't see actually the battle because it's just cannonballs on the ground. So the drama, it's all in our mind. Looking at the picture, knowing what it is, reading the title, we are already triggered, and our imagination works imagining the war that we don't see. So that's the power of the image, that's the power of representation, and that's the power of photography, triggering the imagination, and it makes us believe something that we imagine and we don't know as true because we have seen it, but in fact we haven't. It's our imagination that has been triggered. So we imagine our war in our mind, and that's powerful. And that image is still powerful. It's an image against war, and it's interesting. Then there is the other work of the Crimean War that's important. It's a documentation. It's a slow documentation. It's not documentation that we can imagine today, because the pause was very long, a few seconds at least. So everybody in the picture had to pause. So all the images are setups. Nevertheless, they document very well what was going, let's say, behind the scenes, because there wasn't they are not frontline war work as we have seen many decades later. At the time was not possible, so the images were still. But still, those images are very important because they were almost the first photographies of war, and the idea of bringing photography and bringing a photographer with all his slow, heavy equipment doing that work was bold, was daring. So Fenton was an adventurer, as he was with his images. So Crimean War images are very important. Shadow of the Valley of Death, it's an impressive image. Fenton firmly believed that photography was an art form, and he was instrumental in the foundation of the London Photographic Society that later became the Royal Photographic Society, that's still active. And he so firmly believed in photography as one of the highest possible art forms that he even dramatically stopped taking photographs one day from the other when he felt that photography, becoming cheaper, more widespread and common as a practice, lost his aura, his importance, lost the consideration it deserved from the public. At that time, Fenton, as radical as he was, stopped taking photography. This is interesting. I think Roger Fenton's life is interesting. He was an interesting person. So if you have time or you're curious, check out his life. It's illuminating sometimes. Fenton, as a trained painter, transported all his knowledge and familiarity with the different genres of paintings into photography. So his photographies are pictorial, or we can recognize them as such, not always, not every time. It's also true the opposite. So painters were taking inspiration for photographs. So there is no such a defined cut between painting and photography. They are intertwined quite strongly and sometimes rather undistinguishably. So he did all the genres of photography: architecture photography, mainly monuments, historical monuments. Some of the architecture images are quite modern though. Landscape photography, and those are interesting because in landscape photography he was really up to date for the time, and some of his images still look very fresh. You can see many relations with the paintings, of course, but also with contemporary photography in landscape. As I said, he planted seeds that we still see growing today. In cityscapes, there are some amazing things, some things that really look taken yesterday, except that the city have changed, and maybe the technique shows a bit sign of the time, but the idea sometimes is amazing. And what is amazing that makes us feel the freshness, the timelessness of those images is that they are utilitarian. So he abandoned aesthetics of the time because he intended to document straightly, and that was advanced for the time. Maybe thought, but happened. So some of his cityscapes are astonishing today. And we do see things that are quite the same. Then he did a lot of still life. Those are quite in the genre. And he did a lot of things that seen today are quite amazing, though they were common in paintings somehow. And those are costume scenes or setups, funny masquerades. And he also, and that's even more interesting, took some self-portrait dressed as, I don't know, a Zouave in Crimea. So during the war and during taking the picture of the war, he took time to take a portrait of himself dressed up as Zouave. And I cannot avoid thinking of Cindy Sherman and all these setups. Some of the most famous contemporary photographers, artist photographers, are working with setups, scenes of genre scene. Think of, I don't know, Crutzen. He's setting up movie scenes. Again, Sherman did a series called Movie Stills. So it's the iconography of our time, but they are making things that painters were doing before and that Fenton was doing in photography at the early stage of photography. So as artists, we shall recognize our roots in the past. We invent things, surely. When we do something and we recombine images, they acquire a different meaning. They have different purposes, but we cannot skip the fact that our imagination, our own personal imagination, our unconscious is rooted in the past. And the early photographers are really a memento of that. So please enjoy early photography and not only nowadays photography. So I hope you liked this video, and I hope to see you watching next one. Goodbye everybody.